I never thought that this day would become the beginning of the end, that each of my decisions, even the most insignificant, would lead me here, to this moment, to the point after which there would be no return. The house was quiet, too quiet, the silence that could have been soothing, but instead squeezed my chest with icy fingers. I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom. The light curtain fluttered from the evening wind, blurring the outlines of the room. My reflection looked at me with slight fatigue, deep brown eyes with a hint of long-standing insomnia. High cheekbones that once exuded youth and freshness now reminded me of the years I had seemingly lived in the shadows. Danny had left again. Another business trip, another empty evening. He didn't even say goodbye properly, throwing a curt, "Take care of yourself," before leaving, as if I were his colleague, not his wife. I never tried to ask him if anything had changed, or if I had just stopped existing in his world. The answer would probably have been obvious. But today I wanted to forget. For the first time in a long time, I felt the desire to do something for myself. Closing the door, I slowly approached the bed where the laptop stood. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have even thought of doing this with the light on, but now I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to relax. I didn't hear the footsteps. I didn't even realize right away that I wasn't alone. Only when the air in the room changed, when a shadow appeared in the doorway, reflected in the mirror, did I realize that he was here. Liam. My heart sank, his tall figure frozen at the threshold, dark eyes wide with shock, or maybe something else. For a moment, the silence became deafening. I couldn't move. I saw how his gaze slid over me, how he froze, unable to look away. I grabbed the blanket, trying to cover myself, but all this movement did was emphasize my confusion. He didn't move. I didn't move. These seconds seemed like an eternity. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. I probably should have knocked. He finally exhaled. His voice was hoarse, slightly trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut. Number no, no, no. This shouldn't have happened. This moment shouldn't have occurred. But it did. Liam didn't leave right away. He took a step back, but not completely. I saw how he looked at me, his lips slightly parted, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right words. I forced myself to turn away, my heart pounding in my chest so loudly that I felt he could hear it. And then he left, without words, leaving behind a silence that seemed to fill the entire house. I didn't breathe, didn't move. Only after a minute did I realize that I had clenched my fingers into a fist until it hurt. Something had happened, something that should never have happened. I collapsed onto the bed, covering my face with my hands. But even if I could erase that moment, even if I wanted to, I knew it was too late. Because when our eyes met at that moment, I saw in his eyes not only shock, I saw myself. Night covered the house with a thick blanket of silence. But inside me, a storm raged. In my head, Liam's voice still echoed, his trembling tone, that short intake of breath when he saw me. I clutched the blanket, hoping that sleep would take me away, carry me into another reality. But reality, unfortunately, remained unchanged. I turned onto my side, trying not to think. But the more I tried to push that moment out of my mind, the more insistently it returned. I closed my eyes, but his gaze appeared before me again, full of shock, but something else. Curiosity, desire, or was it my own fantasy? I hated myself for these thoughts. In the morning, I met Liam in the kitchen. He stood by the coffee machine, his back to me. I noticed how his shoulders tensed when I entered. He knew I was there. I swallowed, deciding whether to say something. "Good morning," I said. My voice sounded strange. Liam slowly turned around. There was nothing in his gaze but restraint. He nodded, not looking away. "Good," he replied after a short pause. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't slept all night. We both knew what had happened the night before. We both understood that we couldn't pretend nothing had happened, but neither of us dared to talk about it. I poured myself some coffee, my hands slightly trembling. Liam continued to stand by the counter watching me. I felt his gaze, and it was different from before. It was intense, scrutinizing. I took a sip, feeling the bitterness of the coffee spread through my throat. Inside me, something new was igniting. fear and a strange excitement. The line between the forbidden and desire had become too thin, but I couldn't allow myself to think about it. I took a deep breath and looked away. "How did you sleep?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Liam held his breath for a fraction of a second. "Eber, not very well," he answered honestly. I didn't know what we were talking about sleep or about us. The silence between us became even more palpable. It hung in the air, thick and heavy, like storm clouds before a storm. I knew Liam felt it just as I did, but neither of us dared to be the first to break that silence. Over the next few days, we kept our distance, each of us secretly hoping that this tension would dissipate on its own. But the more we were silent, the more palpable this attraction became. It hung in the air, filling the rooms, making me nervous even from his accidental presence nearby. One evening, I entered the living room and found Liam watching an old movie that we had once watched together. I froze in the doorway, my heart tightening with the realization that he remembered. He turned his head, his gaze met mine, and at that moment, something changed. "Why are you watching this?" I whispered, taking a step closer. Liam remained silent, but there was too much emotion in his eyes. He nodded to the couch, inviting me to sit next to him. I shouldn't have, but I still approached. My fingers trembled as I touched the edge of the pillow. "Emma," he said softly, "we can't pretend this isn't happening." I bit my lip, understanding what he was talking about. The boundaries were blurred, and the question now was, would we dare to cross them? The evening sun filled the room with a soft golden light, creating an illusion of calm that I so desperately craved. But inside me, a storm of conflicting emotions raged. The events of the past few days gave me no peace, and I felt reality beginning to distort under the weight of my thoughts. Liam was avoiding me. His presence in the house had become ghostly. He left early in the morning and returned late at night when I was already pretending to be asleep. Each of his steps, each sound coming from his room, echoed within me. I tried to convince myself that this was for the best, that the distance between us would help forget that awkward moment. But with each passing day, this distance became unbearable. One evening, when the silence of the house became particularly oppressive, I decided to go outside to clear my head. The garden behind the house was my refuge, a place where I could hide from my thoughts. I sat on a bench under the old oak tree, inhaling the cool night air. "Can't sleep?" A soft voice sounded behind me. I started and turned around. Liam stood in the shadow of the tree, his face barely visible in the dim light. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. He came closer and sat down next to me, leaving a small distance between us. We were silent, listening to the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of passing cars. "Emma," he began, breaking the silence, I wanted to apologize for that day." I turned to him, trying to make out his expression in the darkness. "No need, Liam. It was an accident." He shook his head. "No, not just that. I feel like something has changed between us." My heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" Liam sighed, lowering his head. "I can't stop thinking about you, Emma. Ever since I returned from university, I've felt something more." I froze, not knowing what to say. His confession echoed my own feelings, which I had been trying to suppress. "Liam, this is wrong. You are Danny's son." He looked up, and in his gaze I saw a mix of pain and determination. "I know, but I can't ignore what I feel." Between us hung a silence filled with unexpressed emotions. I felt the thin line between right and forbidden beginning to blur. "Emma," he whispered, moving closer, "tell me you don't feel the same, and I'll go." I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts, but instead of clarity, I felt only growing desire. "Liam," he leaned in closer, his breath touching my skin. "Tell me the truth." My lips trembled, the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't lie, neither to him nor to myself. At that moment, the house door creaked and we both jumped apart. Danny stood on the threshold, his silhouette outlined against the light from inside. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tense. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. "Just talking," Liam replied, trying to stay calm. Danny looked at us, his eyes narrowing. It's time to sleep. It's late. We nodded and, without saying another word, headed toward the house. But I knew that after that evening, nothing would ever be the same. The thin line between the forbidden and desire had been crossed, and there was no going back. The evening descended on the city, wrapping the streets in the soft light of street lamps and creating an illusion of calm. But inside me, a storm of emotions raged, which I vainly tried to suppress. After Liam accidentally caught me in that intimate moment, our communication became strained, filled with hidden glances and unspoken words. I sat in the living room, trying to concentrate on a book, but the words blurred before my eyes. Thoughts constantly returned to Liam, his gaze, his presence, how his voice sounded when he apologized for his clumsiness. I felt the tension between us growing, like an invisible thread connecting our souls. Suddenly, I heard his footsteps. Liam entered the room, his face thoughtful, his eyes searching for mine. My heart beat faster, and I felt my cheeks flush. "Emma, can we talk?" His voice was soft, but there was determination in it. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He sat down opposite me, his knees almost touching mine. Between us hung a silence filled with anticipation. I can't stop thinking about what happened," he began, lowering his gaze. "It's wrong, I know, but I feel something I shouldn't feel." My heart tightened. I understood him. I felt the same way. "Liam," I whispered, reaching out and touching his hand. "I do too. But we can't let this ruin our lives." He looked up, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own feelings. Fear, desire, doubt. "Maybe we should stay away from each other," he suggested, though there was no conviction in his voice. I knew that would be the right decision, but the thought of never seeing him again, never hearing his voice, was unbearable. "Maybe," I replied, looking away. "But can we?" The silence enveloped us again, but this time it was different. In it was understanding, acceptance that our lives had changed forever. That evening, we didn't come to any decision, but one thing was clear. The boundary between reality and illusion had become too thin, and we both were afraid to take a step that could destroy everything. The evening sun painted the sky in crimson hues when Emma sat on the porch of the house, watching the shadows lengthen on the lawn. Inside her, a storm of emotions raged. Guilt, regret, fear, and hope. She knew that tonight would be decisive. Liam approached silently as always. His presence was both comforting and unsettling. He sat down next to her, not touching her, but the closeness of his body was acutely felt. "Emma," he began, his voice soft but determined. "We can't go on like this." She nodded, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "I know." Silence hung between them, filled with unspoken words and suppressed feelings. "Danny will be back tomorrow," Liam continued. "We need to decide what we're going to do." Emma closed her eyes, feeling tears well up. "I can't ruin his life, Liam, but I can't live a lie either." Liam sighed, his hand instinctively reaching for hers, but he stopped, restraining himself. "Maybe we should tell him everything." Emma shuddered at the thought. It would kill him. They fell silent again, each lost in their thoughts. "I'll leave," Liam finally said. "It will be better for everyone." Emma turned to him, her eyes wide with horror. "No, please don't leave me." Liam looked at her with pain in his eyes. "Emma, we can't be together. It's wrong." She knew he was right, but her heart was breaking. "I love you, Liam." He closed his eyes, struggling with his own feelings. "And I love you, but sometimes love is not enough." Emma felt her world crumbling. "What are we going to do?" Liam stood up, his face grim but determined. "I'll leave. You'll stay with Danny. Try to rebuild your relationship." She wanted to object, but she knew it was useless. "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning." Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please stay at least for tonight." Liam hesitated, but then nodded. "Okay." They spent the night together, not saying a word, just enjoying the last moments of closeness. In the morning, Emma woke up alone. Liam had left, leaving only a note. Emma, I'm leaving because I love you. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Liam. She clutched the note in her hand, feeling her heart break. When Danny returned, he noticed the changes in Emma. She had become quieter, more thoughtful. Is everything okay? He asked one evening. Emma smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Yes, everything is fine. But inside, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. Months passed. Emma tried to rebuild her relationship with Danny, but Liam's shadow was always between them. One day she received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph, Liam smiling against the backdrop of a sunset. On the back was written, Emma, I hope you are happy. I think about you every day. Liam. Emma closed her eyes, feeling a mix of pain and warmth. She knew that their love was forbidden, but she also knew that it was real. And in that moment, she found a strange peace, accepting that sometimes love requires sacrifice. She carefully placed the photo in a drawer, a reminder of a love that could never be, but would always remain a part of her. And with that acceptance, she began to heal, finding strength in the knowledge that she had loved truly, even if it was only for a moment.